One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today on the show, we've got Barrett Boston. Barrett's the Chief Revenue Officer at TriNet, incredible company. And we talk about his background in sales, but also importantly, he started off as a private equity analyst at Merrill Lynch Capital Partners. So he was in the finance world, and he decided that he just had to be in sales. He had to be an operator. And so he ultimately found his way to an incredible career at IBM before moving on to become CRO of TriNet. He had a stint at TravelClick where he was president of the Americas before that. But it's a really, really good conversation. He's an incredible leader and just inspiring. And, of course, we're talking about what's going on during the pandemic, but also just about his leadership skills and his experience. So I really enjoyed the conversation. Now, before we get there, we want to thank our sponsors. And also, we want to remind you about a new launch that happened on Sales Hacker. For a long time now, Sales Hacker's produced industry-leading sales content. But what we recently done is turn saleshacker.com into a community so we can all learn and be better together. So rather than just reading or listening, you can now ask questions and get amazing, thoughtful answers from other B2B sales professionals who have been there before. So go on to saleshacker.com, create your member profile today. It's free, of course, and it's the best way to take part in great sales conversations, just like the one we're having with Barrett Boston. Now, before we get there, we've got a new sponsor on the show. So we also want to thank our sponsors. Our new sponsor is LinkedIn, a company you've undoubtedly heard of. Sales teams have had to quickly adapt to a new normal. With limits on in-person meetings, it's even more important to double down on your digital selling strategy. Sales leaders must shift their focus to empowering talent, strengthening customer relationships, and acquiring new opportunities in order to survive and thrive in this environment. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a relationship-based digital selling tool that is designed to help you do just that. You can help your sales teams increase their pipeline, win rates, and deal sizes. Go to sales.linkedin.com to try it out for yourself. And of course, our second sponsor is Outreach, the #1 sales engagement platform. Outreach revolutionizes customer engagement by moving away from siloed conversations to a streamlined and customer-centric journey. Leveraging the next generation of artificial intelligence, the platform allows sales reps to deliver consistent, relevant, and responsible communications for each prospect every time, enabling personalization at scale, previously unthinkable. Check them out at outreach.io. Let's listen to my interview with Barrett Boston. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today, we are incredibly honored and excited to have on the show Barrett Boston. Barrett's the Chief Revenue Officer of TriNet, a $4 billion public company. And today we're going to be talking about moving a field sales team to remote and moving an inside sales team to remote, given everything that's happening in the COVID crisis, and what the challenges and how Barrett and his team have dealt with that because he runs a very large team. So without further ado, Barrett, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sam, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on the podcast with you today.
We're excited to have you. So the first thing we like to do is we like to start with your baseball card so we can, as I always say, contextualize your expertise and your experience. So your name is Barrett Boston. You're Chief Revenue Officer at TriNet. A lot of folks know who and what TriNet is, but many folks don't. So give us a little bit of background on the company.
Sure. Well, TriNet is a public company. Went public a few years ago. We're about a $3 billion market cap company in the human resources space. So we provide human resources expertise, technology, benefits plans, everything related to your people so that you can focus on your core business. So that's TriNet. We operate across the U.S., all 50 states. And just for purposes of this podcast, we've got a sales force about 600 strong, and we've been in business about 31 years.
Wow, that's a long time. And only went public recently, so for a private company for a very long time.
That is true. We went public in 2014. It was private equity backed over the years, but really exploded in the last 10 years. It was through a combination of organic growth and acquisitions over the last 10 years. And of course, this whole space, which is called the PEO industry, professional employer organization, has grown quite rapidly over the last decade.
Yeah, it sure has. Well, tell us, how'd you get here? How did you become, a lot of folks out there listening and wanting to understand, how does one become the CRO of a large public company? So give us a little bit of background. How'd you get into sales? Where are you from? Just help us understand, a little bit about the career trajectory.
Sure. And I'll tell you, Sam, I probably do not have a typical path, and I don't know if there is a typical path into sales. As with a lot of your guests on your podcast, a lot of us kind of stumble into it. But I did make at one point a conscious decision around it. But my first job out of college was as a financial analyst for a private equity firm. And what I learned from that experience was that I was more interested in working with the companies themselves than working on the financial engineering of those companies. So I went back to business school and took a hard left turn and decided I was going to throw myself into sales as a way to help grow companies. And I got to tell you, Sam, that was not an incredibly popular or common decision coming out of business school to go into sales, but I was determined to do it and found a technology startup that was willing to give me a shot, but it wasn't as a sales rep. My entree into sales actually was through sales operations. And they reasoned that, hey, you're kind of a financially minded guy. Why don't you run sales operations? I did that for about a year or so, finally convinced our CEO to give me a sales territory because I was determined to go do this thing. And he finally relented, gave me a sales territory, made my number, did well. The company didn't survive. So that was my first lesson in startups, is that they quite often don't make it. But it made me stronger. It made me realize that sales was for me. And I ended up going far to the other end of the spectrum, joined IBM and as a sales rep, and then was a sales manager, sales executive, ended up running global database sales, global big data and analytics sales, had about a 12-year career at IBM. And it really was my formal schooling, if you will, on sales and sales management. That's something that IBM is known for. Then got an opportunity about 5 years ago to be CRO for a private equity-backed company in the hospitality space. This was the first time that I was really focused on the SMB market and had a great experience there, was recruited to TriNet a little less than 3 years ago. And as a part of that process, we moved to the West Coast. But phenomenal opportunity that I couldn't pass up to be Chief Revenue Officer for a public company and a very interesting company like TriNet. And it's been a great experience over the last 3 years. So that's kind of how I got here. I'm not sure that's a typical path, Sam, but I'm not sure there is a typical path. The only thing I would say that is typical is that I found out very early on that I was passionate about helping companies grow. And in my mind, that's a lot of what sales is about, is helping to solve business problems, helping companies figure out how to grow. That was the one thing I knew, and I found that sales to be the path that allowed me to do that.
That's a great story, and I think you're exactly right that especially, did you go to HBS? Is that right?
I did. I went to Harvard for business school, and great experience. We just had our virtual 20-year reunion, and it was kind of funny, actually. A friend of mine from the class said, "Hey, I bet not only were you one of the few guys out of our class to go into sales, you're probably the only one still in sales." And I'm not sure if that was a compliment, Sam, but I'm going to take it as a compliment. Whatever the case may be, I seem to be the last one standing, and it's because I enjoy it so much. I just enjoy growing our own company, but also looking across every sector of the economy. And that's the neat thing about a company that does stretch across the various sectors of the economy, is just having an opportunity to dive into each industry and help companies grow. So that's why I'm in it. That's why I stayed in it to this day.
To your point about non-traditional, I think like the most common, lots of people from, business school go to work at early stage companies. Not all of them go into finance, especially now, but they tend to go into like strategy and operations because they tend to not want to get their hands dirty. Did you consider, like, hey, I want to be the FP&A analyst or something like that, like some operational person at a startup versus, trying to go in there and carry a bag and actually close business?
I considered it maybe for a split second, but not for long. I just decided that it's the sales function that grows companies and that drives the economy, quite frankly. And so, the reason, Sam, I think part of that happens, I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy coming out of business school that people don't go into sales. It's because not only do we not teach sales in business school for the most part, but let's be honest. I mean, business schools kind of look down their nose at sales as just sort of a function that people who don't go to business school do. And I think that is slowly changing over time, probably since when I was in school 20 years ago. But I think it's a great mistake that schools have made over time. Some have caught on. Some teach marketing. Not all of them teach sales. But it's a huge mistake because it is the sales function that drives the economy, drives businesses, and particularly startups. So I realized that. I realized about myself, that this was something that I could get passionate about and something that really would allow me to make a big impact on business.
Well, you certainly have. And just to add on to your statement, I went to undergrad business school at the University of Virginia, and I went back to do some guest lecturing, and I was speaking at the quote unquote sales class, but they refused the school, McIntyre, refused to call it sales. So they called it like creating customer value or something like that.
Yeah,
they would not
can't quite bring themselves to utter the S word.
It's if you're not going into consulting or finance, what are you doing with your life? Why? That's their main question. So
exactly. So I suspect that'll change maybe as business schools are forced to become more and more relevant, but it's probably, in my mind, the biggest miss among business schools over the last few decades.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about the topic du jour, which is, so many companies out there in the world are dealing. I mean, the word, they did like a word cloud or something. I keep hearing the word unprecedented is used, 50 million times, but right. It is unprecedented. We're in a new environment. What's your take on the situation, and particularly, given what we're talking about, which is transitioning your team to a work from home situation? Let's talk about some of the lessons that you learned, but what's your overall take on the environment, and what have you learned over the last couple of months?
Well, you're right. It is a very hot topic. And I think that COVID-19 only has accelerated what was a conversation that was kind of on a low simmer anyway. And so a lot of these things in terms of societal changes, but the way we look at where workers operate, that was happening in the background anyway. It's just that this has dramatically accelerated it. And I believe that while I hope that we return to something like what was normal before, I think that what is normal is not going to look like what normal looked like before. And a lot of the changes that we're seeing right now, especially this debate around where workers, including salespeople, will work, I think a lot of those things, while they might not become permanent in terms of working from home, a lot of the aspects of what we have learned and we've picked up over this period of time will still be relevant, and some aspects may become permanent. And so we've learned a lot over the last couple of months. And at the time you and I are having this conversation, we're a couple of months into this COVID-19 pandemic and working from home. And we've had to learn a lot in a very short period of time about how to transition a sales force that was accustomed to working from the office, whether that was a field sales force or an inside sales force. We've got both. And how to transition to managing them and having them work remotely, all while their prospects are working remotely, of course. What I've found is that all the same things apply to working remotely as they did working from the office. You just have to be twice as sharp about everything that you do. And so there's an interesting saying, I'm sure you've heard it, that when the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked. And I think that that's very relevant to what's going on right now. The tide has gone out and you see who does or doesn't have strong sales processes. And the people with strong sales process at the rep level, at the manager level, those are the ones who are doing well right now. The ones who were tight around prospecting, the managers who were tight around inspecting what they expect, those are the ones who are doing well. So it's not, what I've learned is that it's not so much about doing a whole lot of different things. It's about being a heck of a lot sharper about all those same things that you were doing.
I was just reading an article today that people are working 3 hours more per week from home than they had been. Maybe they're substituting commuting time for work. But have you found that the daily rhythm, what's been your experience about the daily rhythm, and what's been your personal work week like? Has it been more intense? I mean, I personally have been working actually harder the past 6 to 8 weeks than I ever have before. So I'm curious what your experience has been.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Most of us have been working harder. I mean, we're finding we're working twice as hard for half the results, right? And in sales, you've got a lot of rejection anyway as part of your chosen profession. So it's even tougher right now where you just can't even get people on the phone. And so as managers, we have to acknowledge that fact that it's just a heck of a lot harder to even get somebody on the phone to listen, to respond to your email, because so many prospects are frozen like deer in headlights right now. So you definitely have to acknowledge that and find ways for your people to be successful, because we're all working harder than ever, especially us at TriNet. We're at the epicenter of this thing in the human resources space, helping small to mid-sized businesses who have gotten hit the hardest. So we're absolutely working harder than ever. A few things that we've done to work through that is the very first week of this work from home time, we started by taking a look at our reps' calendars and our own calendars at the management level and just cleaning our calendars. And think of it as like cleaning out your closet. The same set of tasks that you had on your calendar week in and week out when you were working from the office just may not be as relevant anymore. And so we literally sat down with our reps and wiped the slate clean so that we could start fresh with a new daily operating rhythm that met our new needs. And so we had to wipe the slate clean, first of all, clean out the closets. Once we did that, we knew then that we had to come in with a new structure for us all to be successful. So, I mean, I don't know about you, Sam, but I never previously worked from home. I know that I'm not good at working from home unless I have a lot of structure. I mean, there's just so much competition for our time. I mean, our kids, not only are our kids running through the house, but the sports teams are trying to have us do soccer videos. I mean, there's all sorts of competition for your time when you're working from home. And so I know about myself that I have to have structure. And what we found is that our sellers actually appreciate the structure that we've put in place. So we've done things like twice a day huddles at the rep level with first line managers. We have put in a very prescriptive fashion, we've put in prospecting blocks on the calendar. It's just human nature. You have to have structure. And again, when you work from home, we've found that we have to have even more prescriptive structure for all of us to be able to be efficient and work through this. And you have to be honest with yourself. Is this new environment, is there a skills gap for yourself, or is it a will gap? As they always say, is it skill or will? We have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, do we have the skill at the rep level to go do 50 dials and to perform on the phone? Or is it just, I don't want to do that? Whatever the case may be, you got to tackle both of them and figure it out. We've been lucky in that we have a matrix sales structure, which is a structure I'm a big believer in. We've got regional managers who have the hard line reporting, and we have industry leaders who have the dotted line reporting for our sales reps. And one of the things we've had to do is make sure that there's a very, very clear role description for each of those two sets of managers so that our sellers don't get confused, but instead so that our sellers get value from each of those sets of managers. So that was one of the first things that we had to do literally in the very first week of this transition, was establish this new daily operating rhythm, very clear and prescriptive structure so that all of us can be successful.
Any specific types of meetings that you found yourself deleting? Like how different is the calendar of an average rep at TriNet today versus 2 months ago?
Yeah, I think that what we had to do was down select down to the one thing that matters to us right now and build our calendar around that. And the one thing that matters to us right now in this transition is activity. And so that means that I've given our sellers somewhat of a pass on near-term results because a lot of the economy is shut down anyway, and a lot of decisions aren't being made. So I narrowed down the focus to this one thing that matters, which is driving activity in pipeline. And so we built the calendar around that. So anything that doesn't relate to that is gone. And so there are all sorts of other types of meetings that might have been useful before or might have been a luxury before. But if it's not related to pipeline building, I'd say training is another thing that is critical. And maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But if it's not related to our one thing right now, which is driving activity and building pipeline, we just got rid of it.
Makes sense. What about compensation? Are you comping people the same? How have you modified the comp structure?
Yeah, this was important because there's a law of sales that most people subscribe to in terms of people making plan, and that is usually most managers would say they like to see at least 2/3 of their sales force achieving plan, and that's critical. So everybody has to have a shot to make plan. Lots of people need to have a shot to exceed plan, but you want to have at least 2/3 of your people making plan. And you have to keep in mind when you go through a major transition like this, you have to allow for that and not fall off of this goal. If your goal is 2/3 of your sales force making plan and X number of your sellers getting well into accelerators and making a lot of money, you don't want to sacrifice on that. And so a transition like this very well may cost you some money to bring about successfully and not suffer through unneeded attrition at the seller level. So you've got to do a couple of things. I'll tell you what we did. We first of all took the opportunity to make some significant adjustments to our compensation plan. We changed the plan year. What we essentially did was allowed for a several month dormant period in terms of results to keep our sellers whole through this year. And that's an expensive thing to do, but it's just critical to make sure you protect your sales force, particularly your top sellers. And so we made significant changes to the compensation plan to allow us to have the same, hit the same goals in terms of success across our sales force. And then the other thing that we did that I think is critical is that just to kind of maintain some excitement level out there, because again, I mean, this can be a very disheartening thing with all the rejection that's in place in sales in a normal time, to say nothing of the current time. We put in place a number of contests, and these don't have to be big. These are little things. I mean, if you think of a Christmas stocking, sometimes kids are most excited about the little things in the stocking. And you know, I'm sitting there looking at a $100 Lego set and saying, you know, what about that? And my kids are playing with this junk that's in the stocking. So it doesn't have to be big. You know, same applies to all of us. This is human nature. We're competitive animals, particularly in as sales professionals. And so get the competitive juices flowing with a contest. Doesn't have to be a huge award. Make sure they're attainable. Make sure there's wide participation in those contests. But make sure that you've got some little things to get people excited about the new structure if you're going through a major transition like this.
Did you have to negotiate with, the CFO or the office of the CFO to do these things? I would imagine you did. Was it a difficult internal negotiation, or was everybody on board? I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a discussion among the whole senior leadership team for sure. And so it's not just a unilateral decision that you're going to make in sales. So in my case, it was particularly a decision made with the CFO and the CEO, but the entire senior leadership team gets involved in a decision like this because it's a major investment to do something like create a big incentive to create that sort of shock value for your sales force. And so it's not just a decision that you'll make lightly. Absolutely.
Yeah. How about communications? How is the tone, the tenor, the substance of your internal communications evolved as you've, moved to work from home?
Well, I think that the tone. I think that that's very, very important, because this is a big shock to the system for your sales force. Again, this is a team that is accustomed to seeing each other, seeing prospects on a daily basis. So it's just critical that you create some excitement around it. I mean, it's you've got to rethink your whole communications strategy. And you've got to recognize and acknowledge what people are going through. It can be a very tough adjustment for someone who is accustomed to seeing people on a daily basis. And the other thing you have to realize is that the law of human nature is that, and maybe it's like one of those laws of physics, right? Is that colleagues who work remotely tend to get more and more remote. You have to constantly find ways to bring them back into the fold in a compelling and interesting way. And there are all sorts of things that we've learned over the last couple of months that have enabled us to do that. Some things have worked and some things haven't worked so well. But everybody's trying video as a way to connect with their own people, their own sales force. And the only challenge with that is that we're bombarded with videos. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the sports teams are sending videos. The school is sending videos. People are soliciting with videos. So it's a good idea, but when it comes to using a video to communicate with your sales force, you got to make it entertaining. You got to make it personal. It can't just be your normal message over a video. There's no reason to watch that. So, I did some silly little things. I grew a sales rally beard, which looks absolutely ridiculous. And, my sales team sees how more and more ridiculous it looks on a weekly basis through my video. But I think it's important to make a personal connection. Throw yourself out there a little bit. And the other key thing is recognition. I mean, even in normal times, that's a fundamental rule of managing anyone, right? We are all humans. We all crave recognition. But when you work from home, it's particularly important at a time like this. I mean, you have to celebrate the small victories. I mean, like I said, it's tough to just get a prospect to pick up the phone right now. I mean, it's tough to get somebody to agree to a meeting. You have to celebrate those little things. You have to recognize all these interim steps to success at a time like this. And so that we found to be particularly critical. You have to be as transparent as you possibly can. You have to acknowledge that you're making expense cuts that are going to impact the sales team, but perhaps that's a small sacrifice that we have to make to put our sales incentive in place. So transparency is key. And you have to simplify the message, I feel like. And I gave you the example of narrowing everything down to this singular goal of activity. I think that is critical, especially in the early stages of a transition. You can't expect too many things to happen. You have to narrow it down. You have to be clear about the one thing that you're going to do, and then you can layer in a second thing perhaps later after we've all mastered that one thing. But this area and topic of communications is something that you just have to put a lot of thought into in the early phases of a transition like this.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about sort of, you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, just what's your approach to training and coaching right now? How are you thinking about, I mean, these are also new sales motions, I would imagine, I mean, to your point, you said people aren't picking up the phone. I'm sure just the way to get to somebody has changed pretty radically, given where everybody's at, given their time commitments at home. So how are you coaching people? How are you training people in this environment?
Yeah, that is critical, because if your one thing is activity, you want to make sure that you're efficient and good at it. And so we're using some tools. We use SalesHood, for example, in training our reps. We tend to do a lot of stand and deliver, particularly now over video. And we're also using some efficiency tools, such as we just deployed the high velocity sales and lightning dialer capabilities with Salesforce, which is kind of interesting. I think it's probably more typically deployed for an inside sales team. We're deploying it across our entire sales team. And the reason is because we are trying to drive efficiency. But to answer your question specifically around training, if you're looking for efficiency and your one thing is activity right now, you've got to drive higher conversion rates of just getting people engaged on the phone and working toward that first meeting and hopefully toward an RFP or whatever the next step is in your sales process. So I think the one thing that's critical to do that I would suggest is a stand and deliver kind of thing. And it's going to be over video right now by definition, but what we're asking our sales executives to do is a lot of skip level kind of sessions with our reps to have them pitch our new revised value proposition. If you can't pitch the revised value proposition over the phone to one of us internally, you're certainly going to bomb when you try to do that with a prospect. So you might as well get the jitters out of the way and refine the value proposition. So that's the one thing that we've spent a lot of time on.
Stand and deliver is, as you mentioned, it's sort of like a role play where the rep has to pitch the business back to the team to get critiqued and to make sure that they're doing it right.
Absolutely right. And in addition to that, we really study our conversion rates starting all the way back at the inputs that go into getting a meeting, such as sending emails, such as leaving voicemail. Look at those conversion rates to see which of the sellers have found success in doing it so that we can replicate that elsewhere. That plus doing stand and deliver, I think, are two critical things very, very early in the sales cycle. Focusing early in the sales cycle is what I would emphasize, especially as you go through a transition like this.
Makes sense. So a big thing that you've done is you mentioned reassessed the market. So walk us through that process, because again, I think a lot of folks out there, and especially TriNet, right? You're selling to every different industry. So there's, I'm sure, industries that are no longer a point of emphasis and probably industries that are growing, and you have to kind of rebuild and redefine your pipeline in a lot of ways. What was the approach that you all took?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. I mean, you've got to reassess where you're aiming your sales force, because your sales force, for most companies, your sales force is one of the biggest assets you've got. So if you're aiming them in the wrong place, it's just an incredible waste. And so what we've done is what I'm sure a lot of other companies have done, is that we've gone through an assessment of the target industries. We have emphasized some, we've de-emphasized others. And this is something that as the world comes back online, we'll reassess again. But the way we've done that is that the way I would suggest to know where and when to shift is to carefully watch your conversions, starting with those early inputs, the dials, the emails, which ones are converting into first meetings and RFPs. Watch every step along the path. That will tell you when and where to shift. The other thing that we've done that I think is critical is reassessing the partners that you go to market with. In our business, we provide human resources, services, and benefits, but we do it in a very partner-centric way. So we partner with banks, for example. We partner with attorneys. We partner with real estate providers. We partner with industry-specific players. And I think in a time like this, it makes sense to reassess those partnerships to see which ones are truly synergistic. In other words, which ones are good for both of you. Those are the partnerships that will pay off. And it's just a heck of a lot easier, in my experience, to go to market in a partner-driven way, because then you've got somebody else standing over there beside you, validating your value proposition, and even better, a joint value proposition. So I think a partner-centric approach is even more powerful in a time like this of high rejection, when you're going through a transition like this. So that's one big area to dig into and reassess.
Makes a lot of sense. Barrett, we're coming to the end of our time together. And the last question that we tend to ask is just around, we call it following the breadcrumb trail, but your influences, people, books, content. When you think about great books that you've read that really influenced you, or great people that you've worked with, whatever it is, but who are some of your key influences? What are some of your key influences? What are some ideas that you think we should know about?
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, my passion is around helping businesses grow. And so the business content that I've read and found value in over the years tends to be more around business, stories of business than it is around self-help kind of books. I like hearing from people who have actually been there and done that. And so I like business stories, whether it's something like a great success like Nike in the book Shoe Dog, or whether it's a great failure. Either way, having trouble with the name right now, but on the blood story, Bad Blood, that book. And so it's
Bad Blood. Bad Blood, yeah.
Exactly. And so I'm fascinated by business stories. And so I prefer to read about from people who have actually been there and done that. And I think that in a similar way, podcasts like yours, I mean, I've listened over time to a lot of your Sales Hacker podcasts. Because the reason is because I prefer to hear directly from people actually out there doing it, from my peers who have tried things that worked and did things that failed. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of business books. I tend to be a little less on sales self-help. I mean, I've read a lot of those over time, but I just find a lot more value in hearing directly from people who are out there doing it on a day-to-day basis. And you get that a lot through podcasts. And I enjoy reading about business successes. And it's people like Elon Musk, as controversial as he is. He's done this multiple times over, and it's just fascinating to learn about. So that's what I get excited about. And that's what I find helps me actually as a sales professional, is learning about how to grow businesses, because people aren't interested in buying a product. People are interested in solving a business challenge that they have. And so the more versed you become in driving revenue, driving business, the more successful you're going to be as a sales professional.
Hear, hear. Speaking of Elon Musk, we're recording this on May 1st. I don't know if you've seen, but he's having he's having some kind of meltdown on Twitter right now. So the speculation is that he's either he's either on something or off something, but something in his chemistry has changed.
Well, that's part of the joy of watching Elon Musk. Every once in a while, he gives us one of those.
Exactly. If folks are listening and they want to reach out to you, maybe they've been inspired by what they've heard. Maybe they want to see if they can be a good fit to work at TriNet. Are you open to people reaching out? And if so, what's your preferred method of communication?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a heavy user of LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is a big part of our sales process. It's just a big part of how I network personally. So definitely hit me up there. But my email is our standard email, Barrett.Boston, BARRETT.Boston, BOSTON, @TriNet.com. Either one of those ways would be great. Would love to hear from anyone and everyone.
Awesome. Barrett, thanks so much for being on the show. Sorry that it wasn't video, so I couldn't see your rally beard, but I'll look forward to talking to you on Friday for Friday Fundamentals. Hey everybody, Sam's Corner. Great conversation with Barrett Boston. I think his approach and his rigor around managing a remote team, a team where everybody's working from home, was really inspiring. And the concept of just over communication and making sure that you're doing everything possible you can to distribute that information. Things like 2 huddles a day, making sure that it's an opportunity to clean your calendar. I thought that was a great concept of just really taking a look at all of the things that you're doing and figuring out what else. And just, again, like that emphasis on communications, that you have to constantly find ways to bring back the lessons, the ideas, the values, and the strategy of the company into the fold in a recurring way, in a compelling way, in a recurring way. So I thought it was a good conversation. We want to thank, of course, our sponsors, right? Our sponsors. We've got 2 sponsors on the show today. Our new sponsor is LinkedIn, which is super awesome. We're really excited to have LinkedIn as a sponsor. Sales teams have had to quickly adapt to a new normal. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a relationship-based digital selling tool that's designed to help you do everything you need to do focus on empowering talent, strengthening customer relationships, and acquiring new opportunities in order to survive and thrive in this environment. LinkedIn Sales Navigator can help your sales team increase their pipeline win rates and deal size. Go to sales.linkedin.com to try it out for yourself. And of course, we want to thank Outreach, their #1 sales engagement platform. If anybody wants to reach out to me, you can. I'm at linkedin.com/in/Sam F. Jacobs. You can also email me, sam@revenuecollective.com. Of course, I will talk to you next time.